Alright, today we're going to do a quick walkthrough video on the installation of a set of rock lights on a 2020 Wildcat XX. The kit that I'm going to be installing is a Traveler. Fairly simple, no Bluetooth, just a simple switch with red, green, blue, and white. Each of the light pods has a lead of different lengths. You've got a longer set of leads that works good in the rear for where you have to do more routing with your wiring. Aside from that, it's a fairly simple setup. You just need to drill a hole here in your dash. This has already been done. You're going to run your wire through there, and then you just mount your switch holder, which would be fairly the same unless you were running with a Bluetooth set. Then you'd be skipping this set. And really the next thing to do is just tear all this center console out. You're going to need a T27 hex driver and a T25. It's a whole lot easier if you remove the driver's side seat, which is easily done with just a lever. The passenger side, 4 bolts. I'm not going to remove that just for the sake of having a comfortable place to work. Other than that, we'll be back when everything's removed. Alright, so we've got all of our screws for the console here removed. The next thing is going to be to remove your knob on your gear selector. For that, you'll just need a 14mm wrench. And then that'll just unthread, and the whole console will be ready to lift out. There are several different lengths of screws, some with washers, some without. You'll want to keep track of which ones went where as you remove them. And it will remove pretty easily. Lift up on the back first. And just slide everything out of your way. And this will give you access for where you're going to run your wires from the rear of the vehicle and from your front, where you can make your contact here with the battery. Alright, so we've got our switch mounted here to the dash. Next step, we're going to go up here, we're going to remove our hood. Which is actually very simple. You're just going to take both of these clips here, turn them 1/2 turn to the left, lift up, and pull out. Set that somewhere out of our way. I'm going to find right here where our wires pulled out of the dash. Here they are. Fairly easy. And what we're going to do, all of these are going to be routed right through where that console was that we removed. Just going to make sure we have them straight, no kinks. And then we're going to route them back through where there's nothing that they can catch on. Nothing that gets hot. And then we're going to start making the rest of our connections and figure out exactly where we'd like to install our LED pods. Alright, so for this next part, what we're going to be doing is we're going to go ahead and get our LED pod here set where we want it. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run the wire here between the top of this fender plastic and the tubing here on the chassis. And once I get that pulled through there, that's going to allow me to route everything to our splitter that I'll show you shortly, where we will make the rest of our connections. This will also let me get my pod here actually held relatively sturdy in the place where I'd like to mount it, which is going to be right here. I'm I'm going to be drilling my holes through here, which gives you plenty of space to get a wrench in here to tighten your pods down. And it also gives you a really good angle for where the lights are going to be shining down on your wheels and tires here. And since that tube is holding the pod right where I want, I'm ready to go ahead and drill it out. Before you go and drill anything, you're going to make sure you try your drill bit through the holes on the pod itself, just to make sure that you're not cutting into anything. Get it positioned exactly right. Measure twice, cut once. I don't usually follow that rule, but I guess since I'm on video, I will. Now that first hole is drilled, I'll run my first piece of hardware through there, and I'll repeat for the other hole, and this one will be done. All right, so both of our pods are mounted up in the rear. So our next step is going to be to go ahead and route these wires. What I'm going to do here on the driver's side, I'm going to go behind the CVT exhaust, actually the CVT intake, pardon me, and I'm going to go behind that in order to avoid all of the suspension components. And I'm going to come back through with zip ties just to make absolutely positive I'm away from all of those wires. Then I'm going to go over the frame to where I see the light from the tunnel earlier, from where I removed the center console. Then we're going to go around to the passenger side and we're going to do the same. Now that part is done. All that's left is to tie the wires out of the way and make our connections later. All right, so we've got our lights mounted up in the rear. What we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to make our connections in the cab. Everything that's going to be covered up by this battery cover once it's reinstalled. This is the lead off of the switch that we installed earlier. Most of these are fairly similar. They usually have arrows just where you line them up, make sure all your pins are connected in the proper spots, and you tighten them up. And for what we are doing here, to avoid this drive shaft here and all that spinning and the mass there, we're going to come through this channel where our center console will go with both of the leads that came off of the switch. That'll keep everything nice and out of the way. And then we'll find our battery connections. That'll go on later. And here's where we're going to connect to our pods themselves. We've got those routed. So here's one. Get that lined up and put on. Then we'll trace out our other one. It's right here. Make the same connection. All right, now our lights in the rear are hooked up. Once we do the ones in the front, very similar process. We'll get all these wires tucked up and tidied up. But for right now, we'll set them there out of our way, and we're going to move on to the front of the vehicle. And for these, with this kit, it came with 2 different cable lengths. These ones are 10.5 feet. We're going to be using these in the front just because of the extra amount of routing that we're going to have to do. You can see they have the same leads. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to find exactly where we want to put them. We've got a pretty good spot right here. And conveniently enough, that'll actually allow us to run our wire right through that panel without having to make any holes. Get all of that routed through there. And I believe I'm going to mount my light pod right there. So I'm going to set that back down. I'm going to get my hardware and my drill, and I'll be back in a minute. Alright, so what we've done here, we mounted this pod light in here in the front passenger side fender well. I drilled a small pilot hole here on either side and just used a simple wood screw to hold this guy in. It's very sturdy, it's not going to go anywhere. We're going to do the same thing over on the other side, and then just like we showed you in the rear, we're going to route our wires back to where our splitter is, and that's our last step. We'll be making our final connections, and then it's time to test, make sure everything's working properly. So we've got both of our pods in the front done, both of the pods in the rear done. So our next step is going to be to go ahead and route these. Here in the front, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. You got a few more components that you're going to want to avoid. Right here, we have our steering column. We're definitely going to want to avoid that. We're going to go underneath it. And then we're going to tuck these wires underneath a portion of the frame here. And then once we get that part done, all of our wiring is going to be right there in that tunnel we opened up earlier on when we removed the center console. We're going to do exactly the same thing here on the other side. There's a little bit less in the way here. Pretty much a straight shot. Just drop that right on down in there. And that leaves us wide open to get to everything we need to make our last connections. So I'm going to go back over here to the cab. Go ahead and pull these guys out. I'm going to route them right through that very same tunnel as earlier. We have right here. There's one. We've got that through. And come back over here to our splitter. Here's our last cable. Same deal right through here. You may notice that a lot of these pieces actually look fairly dirty. This is not the first vehicle this kit's been installed in. That's a store you're definitely going to want to tune in for the full details another time. But this exact same kit has been installed in 2 of these exact same vehicles. All of those connections are made. All that's left now is to make our connections here to the battery. In this case, we are going to be getting our power straight from the battery. I'm sure many of the Bluetooth devices or ones that work on a rocker switch like these, you'd be getting your power from a switch or an accessory power rail. Here, since I have this fairly simple switch, the easiest thing for me to do is going to be tap it right off the battery, which is just going to require a Phillips head screwdriver on this machine. All right, so here we've got our last connections made. Everything's hooked into the splitter. We've got our power and our ground from the battery. I would always recommend using ring terminals for those. I didn't have any. I'll be putting them on in the next few days, I suppose. I do like to do things properly. Next step is just going to be to go ahead and tuck all of our wires from the front nice and neat, and then everything here that's going to be in our battery compartment. I want to keep that out of the way of any moving parts. As I mentioned before, there is a drive shaft through there. There's also some coolant lines that get pretty warm, so we're going to want to stay away from those as well. It's all fairly easy to do. There's a pretty good amount of space in here. After that, all that's really left is just basically reverse order everything that we took off, put it back in. We'll go ahead and do a quick test now, show you all the lights are working and the different color options that come with this particular traveler kit. We've got white, blue, green, red, and off. And this kit is really nice. It cost you about 50 bucks. I actually purchased mine from Tractor Supply. Not sure if anybody else carries them, but all of the detents on the switch are very positive. The installation is pretty easy. I expect if I wasn't doing it on video, probably 20 minutes or so, it could have been done. They work great. They're pretty durable. Like I said, this is the second machine they've been on. Mud, rocks, everything, they wash right off, keep shining. All I could really ask for. You don't have near as many color options as you do with some of the Bluetooth ones, but as far as simplicity and just the red color that I was looking for, I'm very happy with them. I've actually purchased several other Traveler products, a light bar and the pods here on the rear, and everything works great. Real tough, comes with a good warranty, not crazy prices. I know if you're in this industry, you probably aren't really concerned about the prices because everything's expensive, but it's nice to save a few bucks when you can. So I'm going to get back to tucking all the wires and we'll show you what everything looks like all cleaned up and be back here in just a few.